Most of the information that's come out of my wellness wheel comes from 3 different medical degrees, many years of experience, my parenting, and all of these are still in evolution. So that's a little bit about who I am and what I'm bringing to the table tonight. So for those of you who don't know what a wellness wheel is, I'm just going to spend a minute or two to talk about it. It's basically a circle, and circles are one of the most ancient art forms that ever exist. So if we go back in time, many people think about wellness wheels being very similar to a mandala, which has its roots 2,500 years ago in Buddhist tradition. So I didn't really create anything special. I just followed the evolution of how the circular pattern came about to be used in medicine. So if we think about like cross-cultural patterns, like Aztecs, right? They had time-keeping devices. The Native American Indians had a medicine wheel. If you think about a teepee is, you know, a conical shape around face. So the patterns of circle have gone through the celestial heavens, the skies, astrology, community, circles of people, circles of friends, circles of family. This whole concept is very time-honored. But I think the interesting part about it is if you follow it through the 21st century, that this whole concept of wellness circles mandala has evolved to be a really powerful teaching tool because it's a clever way to teach the interconnectedness of everything that we're doing. So my pediatric wellness wheel basically focuses on the integration of nutrition, sleep, computers, and environmental exposures, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we're going to talk about how all these dimensions are completely interconnected and form the foundation of health and well-being. So I'm going to take a quick second to just go over what my wellness wheel is before I'm going to invite all of you to join in with your wellness wheels. So this was designed after like a lot of thought, and Linda Carlson, some of you may know her, actually designed this. So my wellness wheel, the core of it is a symmetrical triangle that has 3 triquetra to it. So on the left is nutrition and on the right is sleep hygiene. And to me, these are the base supports of health. If somebody's not eating well and they're not sleeping well, no matter what we try to give them, we could go through every single shelf and give them one of everything that is in coastal wellness, and the people still are not going to get better. And then at the top where the books are, I call that acquisition of knowledge, and it's basically anybody's ability to become a successful learner. And I don't mean an academic learner. This is a baby learning at home, learning about how to be at home, at school, at work, how to be a member of the greater community at large. And then the inside circle is integrative medicine. The outside circle is Western medicine. And I'm not sure how well you can appreciate it, but on the sides there's these little squiggly lines, and those represent the imponderable forces of digital toxicity and environmental exposures. And then in the center is the earth, which is our access of world knowledge. Like, we're all here to try to become better people and to become smarter, so that's what we're all striving for. So wherever you touch your finger, anywhere on this wellness wheel, everything is completely connected, and you can't separate one piece from another. So my goals tonight in guiding you through designing your own wellness wheels is to help you to learn to unlearn. So most people come to lectures or talks or discussions to learn something to take home. And what I hope everybody walks out of here is that they unlearned something tonight. So what I'm hoping that you're going to unlearn is all the stories that you've come to believe are true about perfect parenting, perfect nutrition, perfect education. And that all the attachments that we hold and the judgments that we carry forth with us are going to go away. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Pendulum Paradigms, which is an expression that I made up, so you probably never heard it before. And I'm going to guide you with hopes that when you learn to unlearn, in your unlearning process, you're going to stop turning on your computers as a place to look for knowledge, and that you're going to learn how to integrate versus disintegrate your health. So if you can learn a few of these strategies tonight, at the end, you're going to take chaos in your own lives, in your house, in your children's houses, and in the community around you, and hopefully learn ways to turn this chaos into calm. So I put Buzz Lightyear in here because, some people know Buzz? Yeah. Do you remember on his movie at the end, he like screams out to the universe, to infinity and beyond? So to me, that's what the switch on the computer is. They should just call it the Buzz Lightyear switch. The minute you hit it, you're off, you're gone. Kids hit the button, your kids are off, they're gone. So what I'm going to try to do is get you out of the universe and bring you into real-time, real-life medicine. So I came up with this expression called Pendulum Paradigms, and it like really made great sense to me, and I hope it will make sense to you. So a pendulum is anything that like moves from one extreme to another. So it's anything that's in motion. So if you think, about like pendulums that move back and forth, they get a gravitational pull and they start to move. And then a paradigm is just a set of ideas. It's a philosophy. It's a belief in something. So if you put those two together, it means you act like Buzz Lightyear, you turn the computer on, you're off on the universe, you're swinging, and at some point you can't swing any further or you're going to be outside of gravitational pull, right? You're going to come right back and the pendulum's going to start to swing. And in desperation, you're going to keep looking for more things, how to feed your child, how to eat, how to do this, how to do that. And in the interim, people in our society, I think, are using great efforts to try to find calm, the mindfulness movement, the yoga movement. And really, for me, it represents moderation. And so by creating your own wellness wheel, I'm going to help guide you through some of these processes. And I do this with pretty much everybody that's in my practice. So one lady, I asked her, how have I helped you to do this? And so these were her 3 words. She said, I'm honest, which I am. I'm sane. That's her view of me. We'll leave that one alone. And then she said, I'm a pragmatic arbitrator because I'm able to sift through all the information in the internet that she doesn't know what to do with it, turn it into real life medicine that she can use for health for her family. So that's what we're going to do here tonight. So in front of all of you is a piece of paper. None of you have to do it, and a bunch of colored pencils. And there's a piece of paper with a circle on it. And as I'm talking, I'm going to invite you, if you choose to do it, if anybody needs anything to lean on, I'm okay to use these, yeah? I can pass these around. And I'm just going to invite you, if you would like, to grab some of the colored pencils and to draw, to write, to jot things down that as I'm talking, they feel pertinent to you. And so I just put pictures up here. These were a couple wellness wheels that people drew during a 1-hour class. Yeah. Probably should have asked before I grabbed them. That's okay. All righty. Yeah. And so it's really not an art experiment. It's all about fun. And you're welcome to leave them blank, because having nothing in there can be as powerful as putting something in there. But these are examples. They're on clipboards. I taught a course outside in Northern California. And this was what people did in an hour. And what they told me is when they were done, like, they look at this and this tells them about their health. This reminds them about nutrition and exercise. And so instead of like trying to write as quickly as you can and take as much information as you can, I encourage you to just drop something in, and at the end take home a wheel that's yours and about your health. Okay, so let's start the first part about nutrition. And this part is the longest part of the talk. I'm going to do a lot of grounding and a little bit of discussion about research, and then we're going to move quicker through the other sections. And the reason I do this is I think, of course, nutrition is such an important part, but it goes back to the whole concept of the pendulum paradigm. So 1960s was like a really pivotal changing point, I think, in American history. So man landed on the moon, right? We watched it on the black and white TVs with the rabbit ears. And then what followed that? What followed that was TV dinners to watch in front of the black and white TVs with the rabbit ears, right? And then started the whole wave of processed foods and canned foods. And then around the same time in the 1960s, there was this great study that came out from JAMA, the Journal of Medical Association, who basically said that the reason Americans are unhealthy is because they eat fat. So they took fat out and they put sugar into everything, and the low-fat movement of sugar began. So more recently, what we found out is that study was actually supported by the American sugar industry, and that the 3 scientists who were the ones that did the research were paid $50,000 apiece in money from the 1960s to produce the data for that study. And so it was really fascinating. My father had a heart attack when he was young, and so I've been in the Framingham heart study all of my life, and it's been fascinating to watch this. But the pendulum started, and the pendulum started low-fat diets with sugar. Then we moved to high-fat diets. Then we went low-carb, high-complex carbs. Then it was raw milk, whole milk, skim milk, no dairy. And then we went meat on the bone, meat off the bone, no meat. And can you see where I'm going with this? This pendulum is constantly swinging. And then it was the Sugar Busters diet, and then South Beach, and it went on. And we're still swinging now with keto and paleo and Whole30. And so the point that I'm going to try to drive home with all of this is it's not that any of these are bad, but people are desperate to look is how do I find health? And what we've really lost along the way is moderation, which is that still point in the pendulum. Coming home to knowing your body, your children's body, who are you? Because one diet doesn't fit all, and that's what people in our culture are desperately searching for. So I'm kind of a geek about how concepts start, and so I really wanted to find out, like, where did people start talking about nutrition? So in 1826, there was a Frenchman that said, tell me what you eat and I will tell you what you are. And by the time I'm done with this section and you're done maybe drawing some things in there, I hope you're going to begin to understand that you actually are what you're eating and your kids are what they're eating. So we now know that our body is a really finely tuned vehicle, and if we give it good fuel, it's going to get you places. But how do you explain this to littles? Like, you need to eat this? That's a really hard thing. So can somebody give me one example of someplace their child would really want them to drive them to? Just shoot something out. The Children's Museum. Okay, so one way that you can explain this to your child is if they really wanted to go to the Children's Museum, would you ask them, would you want the gas tank to be on empty, half, or full to go to the Child's Museum? And your child clearly would say that they want the car to be filled with gas because they have a motivation to go to the Children's Museum. So a lot of the work that I do in pediatrics and in the concept of this wheel is to bring life to the children's level, because when we talk to kids at a level that they don't have the psychological development to understand, we're really talking to ourselves, and that gets really old and it gets really frustrating and everybody loses their tempers. So a good way to explain this whole concept about fuel is to ask kids, where do you want to go? Where do you want your body to go? A lot of what we've learned is more recent, and there's been some profound research. So I think the first research that gave us a lot of information about who we are and what we're eating was the Human Genome Project. It was NIH sponsored from 1990 to 2003. Learned is that genes are our blueprint, and they mapped 20,000 genes out of this project. And so it was this huge international collaborative research project aimed at mapping and sequencing the human genome. And the whole point of it was to find out, are there genetic factors in human disease that are paving the way? Are there new strategies? Are there new ways to look at health to see whether or not we have drivers that we have some control over? And then following the Genome Project, right behind it on its back was the Human Microbiome Project in 2005. And that's when NIH put $115 million into this project. And it really moved us forward in our understanding of health and disease. So what this project showed to us, and I think a lot of people knew it, but it proved it, is that inside of us, we have trillions, 100 trillions of bacteria inside of us. And they outweigh us 10 to 1. So if you think you're ever going to eradicate all the bacteria and all the living organisms in your body, you could never do it, because the truth is you're only 1% human. And it's a really hard thing for a lot of people to accept it, but we are this very, very delicate ecosystem about all of these microorganisms. And what we found, knew this before, but the project proved it to us, that in an early embryonic cell in its first division, some goes to the stomach, same cell, and some of it goes up to the brain. So we have what's called a bidirectional highway from our gut to our brain. So when we put toxic loads in our stomach, we're putting toxic loads in our brain. They are completely they can't be separated out. So when we try to treat neurodevelopmental problems with children, or behavioral problems or sleep problems, and we're not looking at the gut, it's like trying to go on the New Jersey Turnpike, getting in an accident and sitting there stuck wondering why you can't get off at your exit. There's no movement in it. So when we pollute our gut, we're basically polluting our brain. The other thing we found out was about epigenomes, which are a little genetic marker on the end of every one of our genes. And these are truthfully what we now know control our health. So by definition, by Merriam-Webster, it's just meaning involving changes in a gene function that do not involve changes in a DNA sequence. So another interesting fact that came out of all of this that for some people can be like, wow, is only 10% of disease is genetic. So when you say, so-and-so had heart disease, I'm going to get it because it's genetic. Only 10% chance that's going to happen. 90% of what we experience as disease processes is because we've tripped on and off these epigenomes. So what triggers them off? They're like little on and off switches. Poor nutrition, sleep disturbance, toxic exposures. So when we have wellness wheels and we begin to understand the intricacy of all of this and how they're all integrated, we're able to take some control of our epigenomes. So when I first started teaching this course, like about 8 years ago, I used to ask people, well, you know, do you think we can change our health? Can we do this? Like, what can we do to change it? We have total control of our health. We can't control the exposures, but we can control a lot of our health. So Hippocrates knew this a long time ago, like way before NIH knew this. And he told us that all disease begins in the gut. And somehow Hippocrates, in his early stages, BC, somehow we lost that along the way, and we're sort of doing this circular loop and coming right back to age-old medicine that was known. So in order to start to look at all these different areas, we really need to look at what constitutes gut health. So we know we have these 100 trillion bacteria, and they all like really want to get along with each other. How does this all happen? So we look to see whether there's an imbalance in this, I call it like a rainforest ecosystem, because if there's an imbalance, the microorganisms will produce what's called endotoxins, and that causes inflammation. And remember, we got a bidirectional highway: stomach, head, microbiome, neurocortex. And we have to start looking at gut health. So do we take probiotics? Do we eat probiotics through our food? Do we eat prebiotics? Can we begin to understand, are we getting minerals? Are we getting vitamins that are our building tools here? And how do we go about to try to remove stress and toxins? So we know right off the bat now the poor diet can lead to an imbalance here. Stress, imbalance of hormones. And again, I can't drive home enough. Two-way, bidirectional highway. Problem in your brain, problem in your gut, problem in your gut, problem in your brain. So this is all critical to our gut-brain function. So many years ago, and I'm included in this whole thing, we used to think about our serotonin, right? People know the hormone serotonin, feel good, be good, right? Don't crave lots of sugar in the middle of the afternoon. Serotonin hormone. Most of that comes from our gut. We think about it as our brain because we connect it to an emotion. And when we think about emotions, we think about our brain. But we're going to draw it in your circle right back down to your gut. So what are some of and also serotonin is a precursor to melatonin, which is our sleep hormone, GABA, which is be calm, be present. So behaviors that are linked to serotonergic neurotransmitter, it means having like enough serotonin, is appetite and digestion. When it's off, we crave sugar. Social behaviors, dysregulated children. Memory, oh, my brain's foggy, I can't remember anything, I'm getting old. Mood, I'm a grouch, I'm a cranky mom, I'm a cranky dad, and I don't sleep. These all go back inside your circle, and they are all intricately connected. So when we think about this, I have to tell you straight out, as I'm looking at you and I'm looking to all the supplements, kids today, they are not all right. Somebody might tell you they're all right, but they're really not all right. And some recent studies in Maine showed that we have the highest childhood rate of anxiety in the United States. So I don't totally know the source of the data collection, and because of my master's, I'm kind of like, a little guarded about it. But it was all over the news. I don't know if it's fake news, true news, but I can tell you that my personal, practice is loaded with littles with anxiety. Anxious parents, anxious kids, anxious society. We're not all right. So we,
yeah, we feel you.
Okay.
Feel you.
Okay. So,
Your anecdotal evidence.
yeah. So now we have this information about the Human Microbiome Project, and a lot of research that NIH did, and it went one step further, which is really fascinating, because now there's a whole new area of nutrition and medicine called Nutrigenomics, and it allows us to really look at the way we look at nutrition. So it's a study and a branch of genetic research of how food affects our genes and how in return genetic variations affect the way we react to nutrients and foods. So I put that slide in the middle because it's really complicated and it's really chaotic, and to me it represents what nutrigenomics is all about. So what we learned about is that in our DNA we have many people have parts that look like they're a little bit different, but we don't know totally what makes it abnormal, not abnormal. Like, how many people here have done 23andMe testing? Good. Okay. You did. All right. I didn't. I was just. But anyway, but you get this report. It's a very long report, and it's very involved. And if you think about MTHFR, which is a buzz, lots of people know about that now. There's probably a printout of 26 like numbers next to MTHFR. But the truth is, probably 2 of those have an effect on something. And so the point that I'm driving home here is, you can look at your neighbor. You can say, hello. What I've learned so far is that I've unlearned already that we're completely different than one another. And I have patients that will come in. I swear, Lindy, I swear to you, I've been on the keto diet for 30 days. I haven't cheated and I haven't lost a pound. And I'm like, I believe you, and I do understand now why you're not losing weight on the keto diet, because it's not, none of these diets are for one person. So it's January. Let's start talking about why maybe some people were motivated to come here. Like, what's the January detox? You know, we go from breast milk to lunch boxes. That's a really big leap for a lot of people. How do you give this perfectly balanced food and turn it into a brown paper bag or an aluminum container and send your child off to school with it? It can get pretty darn complicated. And so to look a little bit over inflammation, I already said we have inflammation, right? Our microbiome, we have endotoxins, we have inflammation. Well, in caveman days, this was all pretty easy because they ate what was available. Caveman went out, he saw an animal, he clubbed it and he ate it. He wasn't in line in Trader Joe's, there was no Whole Foods, and there was no home delivery services. He had to eat what was around him. But our diets in 2020 are mostly dictated by commercial manufacturing. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, not so much just in packaging, but what's happened to our soil and why are so many people magnesium deficient? Why do kids need magnesium? And so there's a direct correlation between diet and the body's production of these chemicals that govern inflammation. So from the time I got my first OT degree to now, it's hard to find words to tell you the uptick in the amount of autoimmune diseases that I'm seeing in my kids. Allergies, asthma, ADD, ASD, Asperger's, sensory processing dysfunction, pediatric obesity, type 2 diabetes, cancers, environmental toxicities, mold toxicities, and anxiety and depression. These all stand for a big word of inflammation. So if we know that stress, poor food affects our gut, it throws off our microbiome, it becomes inflamed. We've got a leaky gut, we got a leaky brain, and now we got a leaky kid. And leaky kids are not happy kids. So all inflammation isn't bad. You know, if you cut yourself, you need to be able to rally up those white blood cells to protect yourself. If you get a virus or strep throat, you need your body to wrap up. So I'm not saying all inflammation is bad, but what I'm saying is that we have so much chronic disease, serious disease that's going on right now. And the big question is, can we change our inflammation? And when I first started teaching, we used to have these very esoteric conversations. Can we not? And the answer now is yes, yes, yes. We have a lot of power within what we're offering to our children and what we're modeling about changing patterns of inflammation. So I put this cartoon down in the bottom because this was me Saturday mornings, bowl of cereal, TV, watching my cartoons and going on. That used to be the breakfast of champions back when I was a kid. And I probably survived on a breakfast of champions because I wasn't exposed to microwave towers, society running at a pace that didn't follow the natural progression of how life was. There weren't 72 vaccines by the time, you know, I was 5 years old, and the list could go on and on and on. So what I want to spend a few minutes is just talking about food, like what are things that you can give to your kids? What are things to model to help kids eat friendly foods and start to understand that they want to get to the children's museum at the end of the day? So our anti-inflammatory foods, I'm going to buzz through this quickly because I think most people have some ideas about this, are like your fishes, your nuts, your seeds, oils, and we want to stay away from processed foods because those are pro-inflammatory. So in our society in America right now, the ideal goal would be like a 5-to-1 ratio. A 5-to-1. The SAD diet, which is the standard American diet, is between 20-to-1 or 40-to-1 of omega-6s or pro-inflammatory foods that our littles are eating. You know, you go into the classroom the next time, drop one of your kids off at school and watch the candy jar in there that the kids are being rewarded with. Go into aftercare and see what these kids are being fed. It's frightening to see it. I go into OT clinics and I see them offering lollipops with red dye number 3 as a reward for the kid who sat through their OT session. So our goal is to increase flax and leafy greens and walnuts, and you're like, right, Lindy, good luck, my kids are not eating those, right? So what I'm going to do is move into some pictures and let's talk about some ways to get these things into kids. So when I have older kids that come into my office, I do a really great, and it's a really fun experiment, and you can do this at home. It's really fun. You take a piece of paper and you fold it in half, and one side is crap and one side is food. And your crap is your carbonated beverages, refined sugar products, artificial sweeteners, and your processed and your fast foods. And your other side is your fruits and vegetables, organic lean proteins, omega-3s, and water. And just make a list. And people are like, we laugh so much in my office because it's out of wonderment. There's never any judgment about it. And it's a place to take the foods that are on the crap side and convert them, modify them, scaffold them so that they become healthier foods. It's really a fun exercise. And I encourage people to do this exercise at home. Look at what you're eating, because kids model what we do. And everybody here knows it, because I am assured if everybody sitting here is a parent, you've said a bad word once in front of your kid. And that bad word's come back at you. And you say, where did you learn to say that? And they just stare at you, right? They take in everything that's around us. And you might not think they are, but they are. And they're really watching what they're doing. So I encourage wholesome foods. Go to the farmer's market. I really like to encourage parents to have little gardens in their houses this time of year, window boxes, put some seedlings in and have the children water them so they start to connect and understand this is earth, this is a seed, and this is where things grow from. And when children are involved in these projects, it's fun, it's little, it's doable. It's not opening a half-acre community garden and wondering how you're going to get there to water it and harvest it. But it's little projects that you can start to do at home with your kids. And it's all about moderation. You know, I always tell this story. I think I have time to tell it quickly. About, I was in a grocery store and a patient was stalking me and it was like really uncomfortable. And I was in Hannaford and I'm going down one aisle and she's coming up and we're going down and up and finally, and I'm like, this is like really weird. And I had a very full grocery basket and my intuitive sense was to leave, but I didn't want to have to come back. So being me and the way I am, I decided to do a head-on into her on the next aisle with my cart. And I said, hi, it's really nice to see you at the grocery store. I had a sense that you were curious about me, you know, and do you have a question? So she looked at me and she said, I don't have a question, but I just want you to know I will never ever come see you in your office again as long as I live. I took a breath and I'm like, can we talk about this outside of Hannaford? Like, what is wrong? And she said, you have potato chips in there. And I see Oreo cookies. How could I ever come to you? And I said, well, first, full transparency. I love potato chips. Wherever I go, whatever airport I go into, wherever I am, I always look to see if there's a new brand of potato chips. And I always will, and I'll never give my potato chips up. And my Oreo cookies, I said to her, but they're not double stuffed. And it will last me a month. And I'm only telling you this because I practice what I preach. I believe in moderation. I really truthfully do. Because when you try to take something away from somebody, and she did come, and her kid really learned a lot and came back many years later. He's a great eater now. He was a horrible eater. And he came in one day, and I don't have time to tell many of these stories that we all collect over time, but he said, it's really so sad that you have so many wrinkles. Wrinkles. I said, well, I feel a bit sad about it too, but I'm going to be 64 and this is kind of what happens. And I said, why are you so upset about my wrinkles? And he goes, because by your size, we could go to CHOP together and I think we could win. So if there's a way to cover up your wrinkles, we might be able to do this. And he went on to tell me all the dinners that he was cooking for his family. And so it was modeled over time. He understood the difference between crap and food. And he came to me on ADD medication. That is why this kid came in. And he's doing great. And he eats Oreos. He eats food. It's about moderation. So when we do these pendulum prophecies and we say, you have to go 100% non-sugar, it's too hard. It's too stressful to do this. So I really encourage people to have fun with food. You can have fun with fruit. If you're making a fruit platter for kids to take to school, get creative in the kitchen, make platters fun, have the kids involved in it. There's kids' knives. Don't be afraid to let kids, cut things up. I remember learning to be an OT, and there was like these sensory, containers that had rice and lentils. And I always thought to myself, why don't you just squish avocados? Like, you're getting the same sensory input. Put the kid in the kitchen. Why are kids coming to a clinic for me to do this? So I encourage, let people get their hands dirty. Do these things, right? So here's a few hints that might be helpful. If you set table with superheroes, they can be really fun. So around the age of 3, parents nowadays think their kids should have chores, and for some reason one of the chores that people think their kids should do is to set the table. So make the table fun. If you have princesses, Pokemon, whatever you do, set it at the table, because if the Superman or the princess or whoever it is eating the vegetables that are on the plate, pretty typically your kid is going to eat it. And you might gain something out of it. I know for me, I was Wonder Woman for 3 months, and looking at me, I definitely, I'm not Wonder Woman, but I had her at my place setting for 3 months, and it was a really special time at our family. I think our son learned to spell his name with green beans, right? Like, these are just ways to bring in carrots, make food fun. It doesn't have to be in your mind's eye, I'm trying to teach you unlearn these things that you were forced to learn. My kid needs to eat it, and then you're telling your kid you need to eat it. Why? Because it's good for you. Well, there's no logic behind that to a little brain. I put a thing up here about smoothies. Some children are delightful and love green, and some kids, if it's green, they have nothing to do with it. So I'm trying to throw out some little pearls of wisdom here. If you put blueberries and chocolate in, it turns it purple and it will overshadow green. So a little bit of dark chocolate is really great. A lot of blueberries, you put all your greens in and you have a purple smoothie. Kids love pancakes. Don't argue with your kids about pancakes. Make your pancakes fun. Get almond butter, sun butter, put things on the toast, make animals out of it. If you're making oatmeal for your kids and they're standing there staring at you, why not make it as a sundae? Have a morning sundae. The scoop of ice cream is a scoop of oatmeal. If you're making cupcakes and they want sprinkles on the top, take a bunch of nuts, put them in a food processor, grind up your nuts and put them in with the sprinkles. They don't know the difference whether they're pink, white, whatever they are. And it's just easy ways to get fun foods into kids. Kids don't like sandwiches. I asked a child once at my house why he wouldn't eat crust. And he very simply told me, he was brought up in a very religious home, and he told me that God created crust so that there was a handle to hold onto when you held your sandwich. Okay, so that was his reason why he wouldn't eat crust. So I tell parents and kids at school, they don't have time to eat things. They have 17 minutes and they want to talk. Think about getting a tortilla, putting things in it that they like, rolling it up, cutting it like sushi, and giving them bite-sized pieces. Kids are going to be a lot more likely and a lot more interested in grabbing a little roll-up that may have some peanut butter, some almond butter, some nuts in it. There can be cream cheese, avocado, hummus. If you give them a big slab of hummus in a jar and a big thing of vegetables, I promise you all know this, you're going to see it at the end of the day. If you roll it into something that they can grab, if you take little cucumber pieces, if you take bananas and slice them up, put them in the freezer, put a little bit of almond butter and some ground nuts on them, when the kids come home from school, they have something to grab that's nutritious. So I'm putting these ideas in your head to put fun into things. Eating foods of the rainbow, that's always an interesting thing in my office. The first time I asked a child this, they said they did. They were very excited. They ate Skittles and Starbursts. And it went one step worse for me. Months later, when I asked a child who was really eating a white food diet, he said he ate Mike and Ike's, but he only ate the white out of the Mikes and Ike's. So I felt like I'd really gotten to a low point in my practice and really got what a white food diet is about. So the reasons that I bring them up is Skittles can be nature's Skittles. And I never take things away from children, and I wouldn't encourage you to do it either. Like, I negotiate all the time because children like to think they're winning and they rarely have to win. So if you ask them if they would be willing to trade you one slice of a clementine for one orange Skittle, most children are usually willing to do that. And once they've tasted that one piece of a clementine, you're able to start scaffolding foods out. For kids that love their granola bars or whatever they're eating in the morning, cut it into small pieces. Put other things that are fun in there. There's all kinds of ways to outsmart kids, because when they're eating these Skittles, they're having blue dye number 1 and 5, yellow dye number 4, and red dye number 3. And for those of you that don't know about these dyes, they're made out of petroleum, the same petroleum that you fill your car with, that asphalt is made from, tar is made from, and they're known carcinogenics, and that's what's in Skittles. And fascinating, the EU doesn't allow most of this in Europe. So for those of you who travel that have had Skittles and M&Ms in Europe, they actually do not taste the same as our Skittles and M&Ms because they don't have these dyes in them. So looking for hidden names, please become label readers. So MSG, hundreds and hundreds of names of MSG. Texturized protein, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, yeast extract. This is all MSG. There are hundreds of names for it. Our government has now decided, yeah, you wouldn't think. You'd think, oh, it's it's MSG. And now we're able to look at things because GMO doesn't need to be labeled anymore. So now it's called biofortified. So when you look in the back of the cereals and you see something as biofortified, translate it into your language, it means that there's GMOs in that food.
Oh, GMOs don't need to be labeled anymore?
Biofortified is what they're called now. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about glutamate other than to say it exists in our brain in very small levels outside of the cells. When people eat a lot of it and the level goes up, it excites our brain cells and they get so excited that they can have seizures and die, and that's where you hear all these stories about Chinese food syndrome from MSG. The other thing I want to talk about really quickly is aspartame. So it's in at least minimum 6,000 things. It's in 500 known pharmaceuticals. So if you've given your kid amoxicillin, Benadryl, Tylenol, over-the-counter medications, they all have aspartame in them. Singular has aspartame in it. So I don't work for the pharmacy. I'm not putting any plugs in, but I just want to tell people that you can get Tylenol, you can get Advil, you can get Benadryl, you can get a lot of things made as a compounded substance at the pharmacy for your kids that have no aspartame, no additives. There's sprinkles that can be put on food. So when your kid is sick and you're trying to keep things as clean as possible, just know that there's options that are out there, okay? Vitamin deficiencies, food selectivity, fatigue, headaches, memory, poor concentration, anxiety, depression, irritability, sleep disturbance. Can anybody in here identify with even one of these? Okay. Anybody have a child who maybe they might want to tag with any of these? At least one. Okay. So we have to look one step further and see if there are vitamin deficiencies. So in my office, kids always get a get out of jail free card, or they're guilty until proven, they're innocent in my office until they're proven guilty. So when a parent comes in and says that their kid will only eat white foods, I'm suspicious, and some of this is my OT background, because in zinc deficiencies, people will have an altered sense of taste and smell. So when your kid tastes something and they say this is disgusting, or they can't tolerate the smell of it, or they can't tolerate the textures of it, you have to think, is there a possibility that they're not just trying to, buck up against you, but there could be a vitamin deficiency? Magnesium. 40% of Americans in the last half century, probably more, are magnesium deficiency. The soil that our food in is magnesium deficient, so it's really hard to get it. So So a lot of kids are deficient in magnesium, they're deficient in zinc. A lot of kids have low iron levels. And sometimes when all of these things are corrected through proper nutrition, sometimes through supplements, the behaviors that they're being labeled for go away, because in our society, under my medical license, I'm trained to name it, blame it, and to try to tame it with a drug. And so I don't want to name it, but I want to tame it through healthy ways. So this was a picture that a friend of mine took out by Roswell. He's really into aliens, and he sent it to me, and it was like, with his permission, I use it because I think it is like the most perfect sign. So when I think about people having overconsumption of like processed foods, vitamin deficiencies, microbiome imbalance, I think that they have artificial intelligence. Like, these kids, they're just not thinking straight. What did I say to you? Heart of hearts, our kids are not all right. Like, their brains are not firing correctly. And putting all joking aside, in a very serious light, I sometimes wonder whether this misinterpretation of perception of smell and taste and cognition, I really wonder whether some of this, coupled with all of the toxic exposures and screens, is contributing to the increase in violence in our society. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about supplements. I do want to bring up omega-3s, because I think that pretty much from age 5 months to 6 months, everybody could benefit. Children's brains need omega-3s. So omegas are made of EPA and DHA. DHA makes up 97% of the omegas in kids' brains. So if they're eating foods that are deficient in it, their brain isn't getting the brain food that they need. For people who have really dysregulated children, I encourage them to look at supplements that have a higher level of DHA than EPA. So across the board, all omega-3s, all cod livers are not created equal. I'm happy to talk about it more, but I really encourage this as one of the big supplements. I really look at magnesium, but for me personally, I like to get levels on children to make sure that if I'm working as their defense attorney, I have data in front of me and we're just not dealing with behavioral I don't want to eat. So sleep is the next part to talk about. So we talked about the gut. We talked about when you're not eating well, your microbiome gets off. Your microbiome gets off, you've got a leaky gut, you can't make serotonin, and you can't make melatonin. So if you can't make melatonin and you have melatonin deficit, in our American culture, what do? You fill the hole, right? So we go to the pharmacy and we give our kids melatonin. So I call these kids in my practice my M&M babies that come to see me, and the M&M stands for Miralax and melatonin, because they come in because they're constipated, because they're magnesium deficient, and they're on melatonin because they can't sleep. And so these are areas like to think about with your own children, what they're eating, and some basic supplements. I'm going to go through sleep architecture very briefly, because I feel like this is information that I don't want you to look up on the internet, because I don't want you turning the internet on. But let's just say we have natural circadian rhythms, and the way our society functions right now, those aren't honored, and we're always bucking up against what our bodies are trying to do. So we have this beautiful internal biologic clock. In our hypothalamus, there's this little nucleus that had 20,000 cells in it, and it tells us when we're supposed to go to bed and when we're supposed to wake up. So through the night, there are two different types of sleep cycles. There's non-REM, which is our very, very deep sleep, and there's REM, which is our lighter sleep. If kids have bedwetting, night terrors, or sleepwalking, they're having a disruption of their sleep patterns. And so giving those children melatonin to keep them sleeping is like basically trying to plug a hole in a hole in a pipe, and the water is going to come shooting out somewhere else. So in our non-REM sleep, most of you have kids, you know the story, right? Llama, llama, red pajama. Kids, the llama screaming, "Where's my mama? Where's my mama?" Right? Kids call them like curtain calls, dress rehearsals, whatever you want to call them, why your kids can't sleep. They need to be sleeping because during that very deep restorative sleep, the body repairs and prepares for the next day, growth and development. So sleep sanctuaries is probably one of the greatest gifts that you can ever give to your child. If a child doesn't want, and I'm not talking about co-sleeping, non-co-sleeping, there's no judgment here, but whatever that sleep space is, needs to be created as a sanctuary for a child. And so I really encourage parents to think about making nests if the child can't be in their own room. There's beautiful silks that you can get at some of the stores to hook down and make protective areas for the children to sleep. The biggest thing is getting electronics, TVs out. So you could say, my child's not watching TV. They're lying next to me in bed while I'm watching TV. If the TV's on in the room, your child is being exposed. So this whole concept of sleep sanctuaries, we've kind of lost it a little bit in America. Toys shouldn't be in the bedroom. You want to be creating really quiet spaces. If your child doesn't want to separate from you, think about taking one of your smelly t-shirts out of the laundry basket and putting it over a pillow in their bed so that they can sleep. They can smell you. When they can smell you, it's comforting. I encourage people to not talk to your children at night about what went on at recess that upset them during the day. It's quiet, it's comfortable, it's cuddle time, and it's the most stimulating thing that you can do to wake a child up, to talk to them about their day. Our society has trained a whole generation of parents that are the most eloquent human beings and the most beautiful moms and dads I've ever met, and they talk more than anything I've ever heard in my life to their children. And they talk, and they talk, and they talk. And what they don't get is their children aren't hearing anything they're saying. So I put on offer to you that when the line comes that no child wants to hear, it's time to head upstairs. We're going to start getting ready for bed. Think about a mantra for the child. I love you, it's sleep time. And stop talking to your kids because they're engaging you and it's keeping them awake. I got, a little one taught this to me. Terrible sleep disturbance, terrible. And finally she said, I'd like to talk to you without my mother. She's very verbally precocious and she's 7. So I asked the mom permission, is that okay? She said, sure. This little one sits in his chair. She goes, my mom gets in bed with me at night and she asks me everything about my day that was upsetting to me. So I get it off my chest before I go to bed. And it winds me up and I get so mad. And I get mad at school, my teacher, my friends, and my mommy, and I can't turn my brain off. And now I have to come see you. I was like, okay. Out of the mouth of babes. It was a good lesson to me. Stop talking to your kids. Mantras. For people who know a little bit about yoga, I think getting into child's pose is a beautiful thing. It's face down, forehead, connected to the earth, calm, taking a breath. Okay? We don't need to talk to our kids at night, ever. All right, so REM sleep is so as we go through the night, we have longer non-REM, shorter REM, and then we go through these 90-minute cycles. You know this, every hour and a half, you sort of toss and turn, and you renegotiate where you are in relationship to your pillow. You're not really waking up, you're just transitioning through sleep cycles. And it's really important that children have this REM sleep, really important for them, because it's when they consolidate everything that they've learned. If you think about babies, they spend 90% of their life in REM sleep. Do you remember when your littles were babies and they were fluttering and you were thinking they were having seizures when it was your first baby? They're in this very light sleep and they're processing. It's super important. So we can't get kids up earlier in the day. We need to let them get the sleep that they need and to think about getting off of these really strict sleep patterns. Because when people have restorative sleep, they think clear, they have quicker response time, better energy, more effective communication, better organization of their executive function skills. So the synopsis of this whole slide, it's long, there's a lot of junk in it. It's a super easy sentence. Remember this one, put it in your little circles. The quality of sleep affects the quality of waking hours. Your kid doesn't sleep well, they're grumpy. You don't sleep well, you're grumpy. We have coping skills. Kids do not have coping skills. They weren't born with them, nor should they have them. Okay, so sadly, in 2015, the CDC basically said, we have a problem. Sleep is the #2 health problem in the United States. There was an estimated 50 to 7 million US adults have sleep or wakefulness disorders. I couldn't write the statistic down here because it broke my heart that statistics show 1 out of 10 children in the United States have a documented sleep disorder right now. 1 out of 10. Okay, so kids need 10 hours, teens 9 to 10 and a half hours, another discussion outside of here, how do you do that with school, and adults 7 to 8. But we really, really underestimate the value of sleep and sleep as medicine. So food is medicine, sleep is medicine. Remember this triangle, those are the bases. Don't sleep well, don't eat well, we have not all right kids. A lot of them nowadays are caused by light, and the reason I put this in here is to really spend a few minutes explaining what light does. So what light does is it suppresses melatonin. Okay, so when you have lights on in a room, lights on by computers, lights on in the highway, it's telling our bodies it isn't time to go to sleep. But remember my very first slide? We internally are wired, and nobody can break that in us, to have our circadian rhythms. So when we first see that sunlight, we are wired by our bodies 14 hours later to go back to bed. So I encourage people, get your kids outside in the morning. I don't care if it's raining, I don't care if it's snowing. 15 minutes first thing in the morning of seeing that sunlight is the best way to set your circadian rhythms so that you go to sleep at night. It doesn't need to be sunny, it can be cloudy, you're still getting that sunlight. So when people have sleep debt, I can go on and on about this, but the big one in here that I really love is difficulty modulating impulses and emotions. So there is an ICD-10 diagnostic code. It's probably the number 1 or number 2 that I use in my office. It's a medical diagnosis, difficulty controlling behavior. Yeah, who doesn't have that one, right? It's a medical diagnosis. That's pretty sad, isn't it, if we think about it? And a lot of it comes from sleep debt, because what happens is you lose control of your prefrontal cortex. You have less attention. You're not able to control your emotions. So again, we're naming it, we're blaming it, right? And we're trying to tame it with melatonin, with all kinds of sleep aids to get our kids to sleep. A little bit about sleep supplements. I'm not against them. I think when people are traveling, when there's short periods of time, melatonin can be incredibly, incredibly effective for decreasing transit time into sleep. I've had kids that have come into my practice that have been on melatonin for 5 years, up to a dose of 10 milligrams of it, before their pediatricians had said, I don't think you really should be taking any more than 10 milligrams. Maybe you should go see Lindy. Okay, whatever, all good, right? I really like Luna Kids is one that can be really helpful. Because it's a combination. It has a little bit of chamomilla, a little bit of valerian in it, and like 0.1 or 0.2 milligrams. So when families are traveling, it's one of the few supplements that I will recommend. I recommend L-theanine because it stimulates the alpha centers, which is like your feel good, be happy, focus, but it's also about relaxation. So these are just a couple alternatives, as well as magnesium. So if we move into the acquisition of knowledge, I just want to read this one thing. And I wrote it down because I wrote it, and it feels like really important to share it with you without me like blabbing in variants. I feel really strongly that to achieve greatness at anything, whether it's just being a happy human, a soccer player, a skier, whatever it is that's important to you, it has to happen at the pace of the natural world and not at the artificially accelerated pace of the screened world. And so when we're living at the artificial pace, we're modeling the artificial pace to our children. And we're asking them to slow down, we're asking them to take a breath. I mean, that's something it startles me sometimes when I see parents asking their kids to take a breath when they're ready to throttle their kids. You know, they're just so frustrated. And we all need to learn a little bit about how we need dedication and persistence, and to be humiliated and humbled by these moments in time, and to stay present in the pace of what that natural world is, and to be modeling this for our children. So we're living in an age of information. You might as well get over it. Kids are at the helm of an information revolution. They're a connected generation. And I don't necessarily encourage people to try to say that their kids can't be on screens, because that's the pendulum prophecy. You tell them that they can't, you're out here, they're going to swing right back into here. But how do you integrate this? How do you work with computers? So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what are computers doing to your kids' brains. So I want to talk about visual processing, because you can go and read about screens and there's plenty of good articles that come out about it, but I'm not sure how many people really understand what visual processing is about. Do people kind of know this a little bit? All right, let's talk about visual processing. So moving forward for the next 5 minutes, these are my rules. A screen is anything that emits electromagnetic radiation. So my list is televisions, computer monitors, tablets, smartphones, dumb phones, children's toys, Apple's watches, and Kindles. They all have EMFs coming out of them, and they all affect kids. So, and what happens when anybody is in front of a screen, and particularly we're going to focus talking about kids, it impacts their visual processing, their self-regulation, and their executive function. So if any of you had the experience where your child, a partner, a friend, a coworker was on a screen and you're talking to them, there's nothing. And you say it to them a second time or a third time, and there's nothing. And you start getting a little bit frustrated, right? And you raise your voice and they still don't hear you. Let's stay in the world of kids. What's happening to these kids is that they're not in a good mood and they're not in a bad mood. They're actually in no mood, because what happens when kids are on a screen and they're visually processing things at a super fast process, it locks up their vestibular system. And when a vestibular system is locked, it puts kids' moods on an artificial even keel. So this is why kids have this look in their face like they're not connected, they're not looking at you. Their vestibular systems are in complete, total lockdown. So rather than trying to convince your kid why they should get off the computer and to use negative reinforcements, I'm going to put on offer now some strategies of how to get kids, how do you unlock a vestibular system? How do you get people off of screens? So visual processing and screens, we know they've been associated with lack of self-regulation, delayed academic social development, obesity, sleep deprivation, mental illness, aggression, addictions. The thing I'm starting to wonder is whether it affects the blood-brain barrier. Remember early on I talked about leakage, the gut being leaked? Kids, they're not all right. We got leaky, inflamed kids. I really wonder whether the EMF exposure is actually changing the molecular structure of the blood-brain barrier, and that's why we're seeing so many more kids who have viruses and bacteria that are crossing into their brain and causing some pretty serious illness. I'm going to go through this really quickly, and basically what I want you to understand that the way the brain develops, it's almost 3 different stages. So we have birth to 7, that's like our first graders, okay? And then 7 to 9-year-olds are elementary kids, and then we start to go into more adulthood. In these very early stages, when kids are in front of screens too much, they lack the ability to develop selective attention, because their eyes are moving at hyper speed, hyper focus, so they're not able to stay in one place at one time. In stage 2, the games are organizing for them. Do this, do that, do this, do that. There's no creative processing of how you go from point A to point B in a game. Everything is organized on these screens. And then there's the whole concept of sustained attention. And so I think screens are playing a lot more havoc. So I call this the eyes have it part of my lecture, because the eyes have it all. And so many children have visual processing difficulties where the right eye's tracking one, the left eye's tracking another, and they learn this on screens because they're on them really early, and they don't learn this intrinsic skill of crossing midline. And when littles come into my office, the first thing I'm watching when they're playing with the barns and some of the toys in my office, when they're playing with a barn, are they playing it with an animal right-handed, left-handed, right? When they get on the rocking horse, are they putting one foot down and crossing, or how are they maneuvering around? Like Deborah's been in my office, like the kids don't get it. Every single toy in there has a purpose because I'm watching how they're playing. So many kids have problems with visual processing, and when your right's here and your left is here, you're not able to cross midline, so you're not able to come into the center to pull zippers. It's difficult to button your clothing. It's difficult to ride bicycles. And so for those of you who have little, start to think about these things. Like, is your child, are they having difficulty coming to the center and doing these activities? A lot of this has to do with visual processing. And part of it is because screens, entertainment, life is going so fast that the visual changes are going so fast that the vestibular systems of littles are going into complete lockdown and they never get out of it. So suddenly all this stops, right? Kids on the screens, time for dinner, you tell them they need to get off. Might be an argument, might get off the screen, but their brain is still going and they're still in vestibular lockdown because the brain is still super fast and it doesn't know how to readjust itself. So you can use all the kind language, all the prompts, all the positive reinforcements, and you can take away anything that you want from children. At the end of the day, their brain is processing and you can't blame them because they are unable to unlock that vestibular system. So our vestibular system's about balance and where you are in space, and it has a lot of impact on mood. So a linear acceleration, like we learn in OT school, is swinging, is calming, and will unlock the vestibular system. Rotational acceleration, running around in circles, keeps the vestibular system going. Has anybody seen a child who's been really overstimulated and you try to get them calmed down? What do? They run around in circles, right? Because what they're doing is they're feeding the part of their brain to keep it moving at the speed that it's in lockdown because they don't know how to get out of lockdown. That's why they're running in circles. Does this start to make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So jumping, spinning, swinging, running. I put some ideas of some Bach flower essences. These can be really helpful for keeping kids calmed down. Rescue remedy, white chestnut, larch. A lot of these can be very, very helpful with the littles. But you're welcome to get up and do some of these if you want, just for a very quick second. But I have a 7-minute HIIT program that I teach kids in my practice about self-regulation. So if you use the word exercise, nobody wants to engage in it. But if you ask a child if they want to frog jump or bear walk or do a gorilla shuffle, most kids want to engage in these. And so, like, just take the cheetah one. So you run in place as fast as you can, just like the fastest animal that you've ever seen. If your kid's like really into dinosaurs, right? If they get into this motion, or elephants, this is like a great one. Can you cut the video for a second so I don't embarrass myself? Like Dumbo, the elephant, walking as quick as they can with their swinging arms, right? This accelerated movement. There's all kinds of movement patterns that you can offer to children. And what this does, simple, fun, resets the vestibular system. It's the same as giving kids an avocado to squish. You want sensory input, get your kid in your kitchen and let them make a mess. Let them make cookies with you. But bear walk is hands and feet on the floor. I really like the starfish jumping because we live on the coast and a lot of kids know about starfishes. So it's kind of like doing jumping jacks as fast as you can. So instead of, again, trying to use words to negotiate to a child who can't hear what you're saying, use some of these activities. And if people want this, I'm happy I can email these. I probably should have brought them as a handout. I didn't, but if anybody wants copies, I'm happy to get this stuff to you. But what I'm trying to teach you tonight is, like, be creative. Create, have visions, make life fun, because when you laugh, your kids laugh, and things don't really have to be that difficult. So I love this one. Slide's a little complicated, but it's about visual processing, and it's about when you're exercising, when you're moving, when you're doing a cheetah or a frog or a starfish or an elephant walk, any of these things, you're giving your child exercise with a purpose that's feeding their neurologic system. It improves the memory, their multitasking, their planning. But I love this slide that said scientists have recently determined that it takes approximately 400 repetitions to create a new synapse in the brain, unless it's done with play. And then it takes 10 to 20 repetitions. So children are hardwired to play. They are the best models for all of us. They know how to play, but somehow we've created this world of making play into play dates. And play means going to South Portland to jump in an air bin. Or play means going after school with a hungry, tired kid to a karate class, right? We've done all of this. We're all in there. I'm in there with you guys. I'm speaking from experience, you know? This is where some of this comes from. I remember like a couple of years ago, my husband and I were up in Saguenay, Canada, and we were doing like this crazy hike through a gorge, and it was straight up. And what really struck me about it is about every mile, they had swing sets for the kids. So the parents weren't saying to the kids, come on, it's just another 5 minutes, we're gonna get here, I'll give you some M&Ms if you'll walk another 500 feet. There was breaks, and there was kids swinging and resetting their vestibular systems and calming. And I have to tell you, I did not hear a single little Canadian child on this 4-mile hike straight uphill ever complaining. So we all know there's lots of positive parts about computers, but for me, I really worry about the negative effects that are happening to our children and about all the EMF pollution. So in 2011, which, you know, if you think about it, this was already 9 years ago, the World Health Organization classified cell phones and other handheld devices. Remember the list that I gave you a couple minutes ago? Those are all on this list. This is not just cell phones. As a category 2B risk, possible carcinogen because of radiation exposure. So you have to wonder with this EMF pollution. Here's some statistics, okay? Neurodevelopmental disorders, ASD, Asperger, 1 out of 166 children. And I'm giving you very conservative statistics here. Children with sensory processing dysfunction, right? 1 in 7 are diagnosed. Now this is a good feed for the occupational therapy profession. I mean, I'm an OT, I can support this. Do these kids really have sensory processing dysfunction? Are they not eating? Are they not sleeping? Are they in front of screens? Is their vestibular system locked down? 1 in 7 is being diagnosed. Right now, 9% of children aged 8 to 15 in America hold a diagnosis of ADD or ADD, and we started at 8 because you technically can't diagnose it until a child is at age 7. And 5 to 10% of all American children are diagnosed with having some kind of learning disability. Again, name it, blame it, tame it. I'm not sure we really have a problem here. So sleep is the big thing. Blue light. Blue light is not for light, period, end of discussion. I mean, there's no really working around this. So blue lights are combined with a chemical to make them look white. If there's a blue light on in the bedroom, it's telling your melatonin, hello, I don't need you. Go away. Go out the front door, go play with somebody else. So when there's screens around, when children are on computers or any of the things, that list, the Kindles, the Apple Watches, any of this, all of these exposures are telling that very carefully monitored circadian rhythm in each one of us, it's not time to go to bed. So lights need to come out of bedrooms. You can dim the brightness. There are filters for adults. But the biggest thing I tell people is just get off screens. Lock them up, put lock boxes, model for your children, put your phones away. Screen use, 2019, the American Academy of Pediatrics, it got so confusing with all of these rules that they basically said that every family needs their own plan. However, they gave some guidelines that except for video chatting, anybody under the age of 18 months should have no screen exposure, which means you shouldn't be holding a baby with an Apple Watch next to their faces because that's a screen exposure, right? 18 to 24 months, high quality programming, parents should watch it with their children. 2 to 5, 1 hour a day, and 6 years up and old to establish limits. And so we can't be without screens, but there has to be rules about it. And the little things that are around us, the screens that people have in their kitchens, that they're watching the news while they're cooking. Our kitchens used to be sacred places where food was. We don't need screens in these rooms. So to wrap it up and come full circle on all of this, really what is integrative medicine? It's treating you, not the disease. In my practice, I have full understanding of integrative medicine, and I'm grateful to live in a community where I have an amazing team of providers that I work with. My specialty, well, you've sort of figured out some of what my specialties are, but besides my traditional medicine, I practice homeopathy. My kids couldn't get healthy without osteopathy, learning some meditation, yoga, acupuncture, OT, PT, speech. These are all part of what goes into this big circle of a pediatric wellness wheel. It's not your job to be the center, the access of knowledge in this. You had kids to learn you had them to love them and not to be the master to have to figure all of this out. You need to find people that can be the team leads to help you figure out, is there a problem and what it is that you want to do with your kids. So I don't use the word mindfulness in my practice. I encourage children to be mindless, because they have to be mindful all day. They have to be mindful at school. They have to be mindful in you. They have to be mindful crossing the street. And in order to get children to just relax, and I just use the word mindless. So you have little pipe cleaners if you want to take any of these home. I use these all the time in my practice. If you're age 3 or you're younger and you're not going to choke on a bead, everybody gets these instead of stickers. And what kids learn in my practice is about taking a breath. And in this whole piece of taking a breath, I encourage them to kind of watch the bead and to just keep their eyes on it as they're taking breaths, trying to breathe down to their belly button. And you can take it and just see what it feels like. Is to keep your eye on the bead and to bring the bead up and to slowly bring the bead down. And depending on the age of the child, you can have them count. Because what I try first and foremost with everybody in my practice is to teach them about what a pause button is. Do people know who Viktor Frankl was? So he was interned in a concentration camp. He was a physician, and everybody in his family was killed, but they kept him alive because he was a physician. And when he was freed out of the concentration camps, he became a psychiatrist, and he wrote some amazing, amazing books. And this is one of his most favorite quotes that is like one of my mantras for life, that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so as adults, I encourage all of us to try to learn what that pause moment means. And it is probably the most powerful gift that you can ever teach to your children. So I'm not even going into homeopathy in the context of this conversation tonight. When we start to talk about toxic chemicals, it's really important to know that in utero, babies are impacted by everything, the air around them, the energy around them. I remember when my son was 5 and it took 5 visits to the pediatrician's office to get each one of his body systems examined, and I couldn't understand why this kid was terrified of doctors, to the core terrified, till I realized he grew in the oven in an emergency room, right? That's all he heard. 12-hour shifts, people screaming, crying, death all around him, trauma. Like, I traumatized this baby in utero, and I wondered. So don't ever underestimate this developmental time window. I'm really actively involved in like politics on the Augusta level. So in 2016, there was a landmark alliance of what we call TENDER, which stands for Targeting Neurodevelopmental Risks. And there was a group of scientists, medical professionals, and environmental advocates that issued a call to action to reduce widespread exposure to chemicals that interfere with fetal development, fetal and children's brain development. The consensus statement was published July 1 in the New York Times of 2016, and I encourage people to take this seriously. The phthalates are the first place to look in your house. They're hormone dysregulators, they're toxic, they're in the candle, most of the candles that you're burning. Anything that you look at that said it has a fragrance is a phthalate. Phthalates, lead, we like to buy older toys. You need to be looking at what are the toxic chemicals in the toys that you're buying. So I hope some of this was an inspiration to think about yourself, what you're modeling for your children, what you're bringing in, and to consider making changes to your own health, because every time you do that, there's a butterfly effect that's helping not only your child, but every child around here and our whole circle of life on Earth. So 7:30. Whoever wants to grab their